Eyewitness reports from Miami describe a scene of a man being beaten by police, predicting that the injuries that he was sustaining by those police would kill him, and then tragically 2 days later succumbing to those injuries. He predicted his own death, and he did in fact die from injuries provided via the police. Now, there is some eyewitness video that's available on local news, but we have some quotes from people who saw what was happening. They heard this man before, during, and after the beating by police, and so we're going to read those quotes for you. One, Perry Weiss says, "He came over to me," this is before the police, "he came over to me and asked, 'Will you take me to the hospital?' He had showed up at 2 a.m. late at night in a retirement community. He had blood on him. We don't know from what. He came over to me and asked, 'Will you take me to the hospital?' When a nervous Weiss declined, he said, 'Okay, will you call 911 for me?' I said, 'Certainly, no problem.' He said to me, 'Will you stay with me?' I said, 'No, I can't. Somebody's waiting for me.' And so at that point, that witness left. So we know that he shows up late at night, already injured from something, bleeding, only asking to be helped. He wanted to go to a hospital and to be helped. Eventually, later on, Mark Lamort says he heard screaming like somebody was being beat. Now, this is the point at which new witnesses came onto the scene, saw that he was in a scuffle with the police. The police were beating him. Wendy Ritter says, he said, "They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. In my wildest imagination, I didn't believe that he would die." Mark Lamort goes on to say, "One of the cops says something to him and socks him. He hit him. Just bam. This guy was no threat to anybody. He was on the ground. He was tied. There's something wrong here." And then Wendy Ritter picks up, "After that, it got very quiet. They heard him at one point yell, 'Baby, baby, baby, help, they're going to kill me.' One of the witnesses says that they heard the police threaten to break his arm. None of the witnesses say that he was fighting back during any of this, that he was helpless, that he was just being beaten there, stunned multiple times at very short range by multiple cops at the same time. And we find out that after the paramedics stopped performing CPR on him shortly thereafter, they displayed no urgency, transferring him to a gurney, and they casually rolled him away to their ambulance. When they departed the scene, they slowly drove away and didn't even turn on their flashing overhead lights." Now, information after this was difficult for anyone to find since police refused for quite some time to admit that there had been any altercation whatsoever. And so many people in the community, witnesses and the family of the deceased, Calvon Reid, are saying that they believe that the police were trying as long as they could to cover up the event. The father of Calvin says, "I really don't buy any of this. We don't know the cause of death. We don't know why he was there. We couldn't talk to the doctors at the hospital. There are so many unanswered questions." And the police are alleging that this information concerning how he died, what the cause of death was, is confidential at this point. And so we have very little information to go on. We don't know what happened to him before he showed up at that retirement community. We don't know what happened to him in the 2 days between the police beating and when he was officially declared dead at that local hospital. We have very little information because the police are doing their damnedest to make it so we can't have any information.
So let's break this down. First of all, you might think, well, maybe the cops were reacting to something that happened before. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
It's possible.
Right. Now, but if he had been in an altercation with cops, he wouldn't have told people to call 911. Right? You would think that he'd be hiding from 911, not encouraging. And he's telling people, "Stay with me.
Yeah.
Please help me."
He's not trying to hide. He wants other people with him.
He wanted people to call 911, and they did because he thought he made the horrible mistake of thinking they would help him. Right? Instead, they came to beat him and arrest him. And what are they arresting him for?
We don't know.
We don't know, right?
Maybe something, but we don't know because they refuse to say. They refuse to even provide information that would be a defense for them. Like, we could question that information if they provided it, but they're not even providing that information.
Now, when cops are in trouble, and if they have exculpatory evidence showing that, wait a minute, no, we were going after this guy for a very good reason, they don't usually hide it for days and days and sometimes weeks while people are getting fired or resigning. One of the lead investigators who hid some of this stuff resigned. You don't do that if you've got all this great information and evidence as to why you were going after the guy in the first place and why you hid the information for all that time.
They showed that tape of Michael Brown stealing the cigarillos, even though it had nothing to do with what later happened. They tried to find any evidence they could in that case.
And so sometimes people who want to defend the cops in every single instance, no matter what the fact pattern is, will say, "Oh, we don't believe the community," like in Ferguson. "Oh, those guys are against the cops in the first place, so I discount everybody in the evidence and the testimony of everybody in the community." Now, you shouldn't take everybody's testimony with
at face value.
At face value, and especially the guy who was with Michael Brown in that instance was a guy who was his friend who also got attacked by the cops, etc. You want to have skepticism about that? Everybody gets it, right? In this case, this is not quote unquote his community. He didn't live there, right? These are people that live in this community. They're like, well, I don't get it. This guy was asking for help. Why are you beating the living crap out of him? Why are you continuing to stun him? And the woman there who said, in my wildest imagination, I didn't believe he would die. I think that's a really telling quote about this on a macro scale.
The faith that we have.
Because that different community has not experienced the cops coming kicking their ass, right? So they're like, in our wildest imagination, we would, like, if I was hurt and bleeding on the ground and cops came, they would come to help me.
They would help you, I guess.
Right? I wouldn't imagine in my life that I'd need their help and I'd call 911 and they'd come and brutalize me.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't happen to you. That's right, right? But it does happen to some people. Yet again, guys unarmed, already injured, passive by every account.
There's no dispute. They found one crazy woman with a history of lying to police to say that he had been attacking the police as they did in Ferguson. There's none of that. They all say that he was laying down, unable to defend himself.
And they have no reason to lie about that. They don't know the guy at all.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, Perry Weiss says, God, looking back on it, I wish I'd have stayed.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were going to do this to him, right? And so, when somebody says, I can't breathe, give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Not like he doesn't have a weapon. He's already in terrible, terrible shape. Now, haven't we learned that if somebody says, I can't breathe, maybe they're having an issue. Maybe it's not a breathing issue, but maybe they're having some sort of chest compression, something, right? Don't keep beating them or stunning them. And then be surprised yourself, oh, look at that, he wound up dying. All right, let's go cover it up now.
Yeah, and look, it could come out when they finally release information. For all we don't know exactly what happened. Maybe he had been in a fight. Maybe he'd been in a fight with police. Maybe he had had a weapon earlier. Almost anything could end up having been true about either his interaction with the police that eventually led to him dying or before he showed up at the community. But at this point, we only have the information the police are providing, and that's effectively nothing. And they are doing basically nothing to stop us from thinking that they have effectively taken an opportunity to brutalize this guy, to kill him, and to try to cover it up and get away with it 100%.
So 3 of the officers on the scene have been put on desk duty. Police Chief Michael Mann has been allowed to resign. Again, these things don't normally happen when the cops have all the evidence on their side.
Yeah.
And finally, you might also find it super weird. I mean, how could they just deny that the guy is there in their custody or that he died? You might think like, wait, that would in my wildest imagination, I couldn't imagine that. That's because you have people who would go and breathe down the cops' necks and say, well, hey, what the hell are you doing, right? Yeah. But the cops are used to picking on the powerless, so they think maybe nobody comes for them, right?
Yeah.
Maybe people are too scared to come for them, or if they do, we shoo them away, and it's not going to make the papers. They don't know anyone in the papers. They don't know anyone in the news.
Yeah.
And even if it comes out, we'll say, oh, there they go again, crying about racism, right? Yeah. But when a guy dies, it's a little harder to do that. And this took a while to get national attention, and it's barely getting national attention now.
Yeah.
So it turns out in this case, they couldn't get away with it, but they sure tried.